Dungeons & Dragons, Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40k, Pokemon. They're all considered rather nerdy hobbies, but back in the 80s and 90s, it was satanic ritual. The creation of tabletop role-playing games, commonly known as TTRPGs, and trading card games, known as TCGs, was an inherently harmless act, but to parents and other individuals around the world, Satan was present within. For those who don't know, a tabletop role-playing game consists of a small group of people playing through a story often led by or even created by a game master known as a GM. The GM is the narrator for the story. The players describe what they want to do and how they react to the elements presented to them by the GM, creating a fun, cooperative environment inside of a story that they create together. The most popular and well-known TTRPG is Dungeons & Dragons, most commonly referred to as D&D. D&D will be the only TTRPG analyzed, as it has been the most subjected to accusations of Satanism. And as for TCGs, each card can change the inherent rules and mechanics of the base game, and every player creates their own deck of cards, referred to as deck building, creating a unique experience with every game played. Since Magic the Gathering's creation in 1993, many different and varied TCGs have been created, popularized, and disappeared, yet the core principle of varied experiences and deck building remains the same. Magic the Gathering, or simply MTG, will be the only TCG analyzed because it's been around the longest, has been the most subjected to satanic accusations, and, also, I play the game, so I do have that insider experience. Inherently, the concepts of a TCG and TTRPG are fine. However, the content and game settings within TTRPGs and TCGs was seen as evil. Before diving too deep into what makes TCGs and TTRPGs so evil, it's important to know the process of their creation and the origins of the Satanic Panic. TTRPGs first came into existence with the creation of D&D in 1974, and in 1993, TCGs came into existence with MTG, which took heavy inspiration from the video game Cosmic Encounter and D&D. The Satanic Panic, unlike D&D and MTG, was not the first of its kind. In fact, it falls under a category known as a moral panic. A moral panic is when the public overreacts to or is overly concerned about something, genuinely anything or idea, the public negatively perceives. Often, moral panics have to have some sort of fear to drive them, such as a folk demon or something that puts a person's morality at stake, such as being a Satanist or supporting something seen as evil.
ACDC. Some people say that stands for Antichrist Devil's Child. Does it?
It came from the back of my sister's sewing machine.
Sewing machine?
Yeah, you know.
The Satanic Panic was most prevalent between the late 1970s and early 1990s, and it affected daily life for those who played D&D and/or MTG. It should also be noted that the only TCG really affected by the Satanic Panic was MTG and occasionally Pokemon due to their early 1990s release dates at the tail end of the panic. Inspired by a board game called War Games, a man from Wisconsin named Gary Gygax decided that he wanted to create his own version of War Games. Gygax's game would feature a 20-sided die, commonly known as a D20, for more randomization than what War Games had with a puny 6-sided die, or D6. He continued to design his game, and in 1971, Chainmail was created. The game featured magic as a game mechanic and boasted a 16-page rulebook to play by. Even though Chainmail was based off of War Games, the War Games player base did not approve the use of magic in Chainmail. Later on in the decade, Gygax and Dave Arneson, a game designer that Gygax met in 1969, began working together on an expansion to Chainmail. During this process, Gygax formed his own company known as Tactical Studies Rules, or simply TSR, in order to market this Chainmail expansion. By then, the project Gygax and Arneson were working on wasn't even an expansion to Chainmail anymore. It was Dungeons & Dragons, rules for fantastic medieval wargame campaigns playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures. It really rolls right off the tongue. At first, TSR only had 1,000 D&D rulebooks to sell. They sold them all in 10 months, by word of mouth. Despite their growing popularity in the 1980s, D&D was changing in ways that Gygax did not agree with. He ended up selling off his TRS shares in 1985, and in 2008, he unfortunately passed away.
Cops and robbers and improvisational theater. In one of these games, an individual takes the role of the game master. In Dungeons & Dragons games, for example, the Dungeon Master, but in the generic term is Games Master, and creates the world that the person or persons who are going to be playing the game operate in it. It can be a modern-day setting, it can be a fantasy setting, a science fiction setting, future, whatever. Thus, again, in a Dungeons & Dragons game, we might have a dungeon master with, 4 or 5 players. One might be a magic user, another a cleric, 2 fighters, and perhaps a thief.
Magic the Gathering was created by Richard Garfield in 1993 out of a desire to have a constantly changing game where one game will never play like another. He was heavily inspired by the video game Cosmic Encounter due to the game's ability to create unique scenarios on each playthrough, and was inspired by the setting and aesthetic of D&D. Garfield first intended for players to bet cards to win them from other players, but soon scrapped that idea and created the deck-building system that is still used in MTG and all other TCGs today. Garfield would use extensive playtesting to edit the cards he had created. Oftentimes, a playtester wouldn't understand the meaning of a card or how it was played, and Garfield would change how the card was worded or played. Once MTG had released, Garfield would go out into the community and observe how people played with and traded with the cards. The MTG community had helped develop the game more than any playtester or card designer did, often providing extremely valuable feedback on the game. Even today, the community has a very strong influence on MTG as a whole, whether that's advocating for the banning of a card or influencing what the next set's theme will be.
Of course, mistakes do happen. Magic the Gathering. Beat your friends.
A moral panic is defined as a situation in which public fears and state interventions greatly exceed the objective threat posed to society by a particular individual or group who is/are claimed to be responsible for creating the threat in the first place. The term moral panic was popularized by the South African criminologist Stanley Cohen when he described the public's reaction to the mods and rockers scene in England during the 1960s. A moral panic tends to occur when public concern over a problem is mutually beneficial to officials, namely politicians and law enforcement, and to the media. There are 3 main theories that argue the causes of moral panic. 1. The interest group theory. This theory argues that the media or other interest groups cause moral panic through the media to push an agenda. 2. The elite engineered theory. This theory argues that ruling classes purposefully create moral panics over an issue that they know isn't inherently harmful to society to divert the public's attention from actually serious problems. 3. The grassroots theory. This theory argues that social media cannot create concern, so moral panics are created through genuine concern and are made worse by the media. While all 3 theories are valid, there are 2 constants that are always involved in the creation of moral panic. The first constant is the 3 main characteristics of a moral panic: focused attention to a certain behavior, a gap between perceived harm and actual harm, and a small time period of actual panic. The second constant is the 5 main sets of social actors: folk devils, the rule of law or law enforcement, the media, politicians, and the public. When the book Michelle Remembers by psychologist Lawrence Padzer and a former patient of his, Michelle Smith, was published in 1980, it was considered the start of the Satanic Panic. The book itself was a collection of childhood memories of abuse by Satanic worshippers, leading to a moral panic among families with children in child care centers. The Satanic Panic had begun.
When one or more of these warning signs are evident, you should look further for ritual items such as a pentagram or other satanic symbols, black or red robes, a decorative dagger or knife, a chalice or goblet, black candles.
Before continuing, though, it's important to know what Satanism is. It's a multitude of different practices and beliefs, often inspired by Anton LaVey's Church of Satan, and that most Satanists practice on their own today without a formal structure. With that out of the way, let's continue. The Satanic Panic had received intense media coverage and attention during the 1980s and 90s, with most cases appearing in daycares across the US. But by the 1990s, the Satanic Panic had begun to die down. The idea of Satanists being everywhere and committing horrible acts every day became debunked, but it still had its repercussions, mostly ruined reputations and innocent people in jail. The Satanic Panic today has mostly subsided, besides a case on April 10, 2023, where a father's conviction of indecency with a child was dismissed. The original case blamed Satanism for the conviction, but it came out that the father's son was forced to falsely testify against him by his mother and other adults.
When kids will do their sacrificing and their animal mutilation, they'll do it within a pentagram. They'll put black candles on each of the points of the pentagram, a grill over the top, and allow the blood to drip into some kind of container because they use it for bathing in or drinking.
In 1979, 16-year-old D&D player James Dallas Egbert III went missing and was found in 1980 with a self-inflicted gunshot wound. A private investigator named William Deere was hired by James's parents in order to locate their son. Deere, not knowing anything about role-playing games, decided to blame D&D for Egbert's disappearance. Similarly, in 1982, high school student Irving Lee Pulling passed away after a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the chest. Even though the Washington Post had released an article about how Irving had difficulties fitting in, his mother believed her son's death was caused by him playing D&D. Pulling's mother then founded the campaign Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons, or simply BAD, in 1983, and created a media campaign through mainstream media and other Christian outlets with the help of BAD.
The game of Dungeons & Dragons has been around since the early 70s, is played by an estimated 5 million people. It is also the target of a group of concerned parents in the United States who call themselves BAD, B-A-D-D, Bothered About Dungeons & Dragons. The reason they are bothered is because they believe the game has been involved in a number of murders and suicides across the United States and now in Canada. At the trial of a 14-year-old boy who admitted to strangling a young Orangeville, Ontario girl and her brother, it was revealed the accused had been playing the game for 18 months, had in fact been a dungeon master of his own group for 5 months.
As for MTG, the biggest source of false evil comes from one of MTG's 5 card colors, black, because it has the most sacrilegious art and cards. MTG would often appropriate demons and satanic symbols to symbolize what a card does, such as sacrificing creatures to a demon or having to pay life to get something in return, which is a common theme among black MTG cards. Jesper Murphers and the artists of Magic's first set of cards would use the iconography and symbols of actual real-world religions in order to communicate to players how a card played or what a demon looked like. Black cards, such as Demonic Tutor, sparked up major controversy due to the demonic art on the card itself. In rebellion to the Satanic Panic, a small MTG set called The Dark intentionally had art that poked fun of Christians who mainly caused and believed in the Satanic Panic. In a recent Reddit post shortly before Halloween 2025, Jesper Murphers confirmed that the MTG set The Dark was 100% a commentary on the evils and hypocrisy of bigoted right-wing Christians. Murphers was coming of age during the height of the Satanic Panic, when D&D was being accused of promoting devil worship, with one televangelist, Stefan Dollins, that would reference the circular design on the back of MTG cards as evidence of hidden pentagrams. Murphers considers Stefan Dollinson's religious extremism as the primary reason he created The Dark, mainly to poke back at the religious extremism present. Murphers was tired of judgmental holier-than-thou attitudes coming from the conservative right-wing Christians of that time, and used the MTG set as a display of the horrific past of Christianity. By using imagery of witch trials, mobs, dogma, and more, Murphers showed sections of history that most Christians would prefer to ignore. The Art of the Dark contains depictions of these ugly sections of history, cards showing fire and brimstone, a goblin crucifixion, a screaming preacher, and other similar things.
Magic the Gathering, because this is the same company that puts out Pokemon. So let's see where they're coming from. Now, from seeing the symbols, your actual discernment should now begin to be sharpened. How many see a circle? How many see a pentagram? Yeah. If you look, there it is. See that? Magic the Gathering. This is a role-playing game.
One of the most important components of a moral panic is the creation of folk devils, or groups that are portrayed as threats to society. In this case, players are being framed as folk devils, often being labeled as Satanists, or individuals engaging in harmful behavior. This labeling wasn't from the game themselves, but instead by outsiders that didn't understand the game and were influenced by religious concerns. The media also played a crucial role in reinforcing these ideas. People such as Patricia Pulling, as mentioned earlier, and organizations like BAD, which she founded, contributed to the idea of D&D being harmful, while the media amplified these claims without any tangible evidence. This very clearly reflects Stanley Cohen's interest group theory, where specific groups use media to influence and promote their particular viewpoint. At the same time, the public accepted these claims due to a lack of understanding of how these games actually functioned, aligning with Good and Ben Yuda's grassroots theory, where genuine concern is intensified by media coverage. Additionally, the gap between perceived harm and actual harm is especially prevalent in this case. While D&D and MTG were associated with themes such as magic, demons, and ritual, there's no tangible evidence that playing these games caused individuals to actually engage in dangerous or criminal behavior. Instead, these elements were just a part of fictional storytelling and game mechanics. Despite this, the perception of danger led to real-world consequences, including social outcasting and false accusations. This really shows how moral panics rely more on fear than any sort of actual facts and harm. Media also played a crucial role in transforming individual concerns about TTRPGs and TCGs into a widespread moral panic. During the height of the Satanic Panic, news outlets and TV programs frequently reported on alleged connections between Satanism and everyday activities, including gaming. These reports often lacked factual evidence, but were presented in a way that made the threat appear real. As a result, repeated exposure to these claims reinforced the idea that games like D&D and MTG were dangerous. In addition to mainstream media, religious broadcasting and Christian organizations contributed heavily to this narrative. By framing these games as tools of satanic influence, they appealed to existing fears about morality and religious values. This created a feedback loop in which media coverage increased public concern justified further media coverage. This relationship between media and public fear is a defining feature of a moral panic, as both groups benefit from the continued attention to the issue. The simplification of these complex games into symbols of evil also played a role in their misrepresentation. Rather than explaining the mechanics or social aspects of these games, media portrayals often focus solely on their use of fantasy elements, such as demons or magic. This selective representation made it easier for audiences that were unfamiliar with the games to accept the idea that they were harmful. In this way, the media did not just report on the panic, it actively shaped and intensified it. The effects of the Satanic Panic extended beyond public perception and had tangible consequences for individuals and communities. Players of D&D and MTG often face social stigma because of their involvement in these games. This stigma could affect relationships with family, peers, and authority, creating a sense of isolation for those who are involved in these communities. In addition to social consequences, the panic also influenced the development of the games themselves. In Murphy's case, he intentionally developed an MTG set that was a direct attack back at the Satanic Panic. This demonstrates how moral panic can shape cultural production, even when the concerns driving the panic are not based in reality. More broadly, the Satanic Panic contributed to wrongful accusations and legal consequences, as seen in cases tied to satanic abuse. While not all cases were directly related to gaming, the broader association between Satanism and everyday activities helped to create an environment in which such accusations could be taken seriously. These outcomes show the real-world impact of moral panic, showing that its effects go far beyond the initial fear or concern.
D&D players. And you see no connection whatsoever?
We see no connection for the fact that right now there's some 3 to 4 million players of the game actively throughout the United States. Right at this particular time, 1985, teenage suicide is epidemic across the country, with some 5,000 kids a year now taking their lives. I think that to say that because that child played Dungeons & Dragons, who's to say that that child does not watch television, does not participate in high school sports, or what per se?
I have yet to see one bit of valid clinical evidence to show that this has been anything more than coincidental with a disturbed child.
Although the Satanic Panic largely subsided by the 1990s, similar patterns of moral panic continue to appear in modern society. New forms of media and technology are often met with the same type of suspicion and fear that surrounded TTRPGs and TCGs. For example, video games have been repeatedly blamed for promoting violence, especially the Grand Theft Auto series, despite a lack of consistent evidence supporting this claim. This modern example reflects the same core elements of earlier moral panics: a perceived threat, media amplification, and a gap between perception and reality. Just as D&D players were once labeled as dangerous or deviant, users of newer technologies are sometimes portrayed in a similarly negative light. This suggests that moral panics are not isolated events, but recurring responses to cultural change and unfamiliar forms of expression. It is clear that the underlying issue is not the specific activity itself, but the discomfort that arises when new cultural practices challenge existing norms.
Mortal combat, in which blobs of blood spurt from the victims, and the winner tears off the head of a woman and dangles her spinal column.
The Satanic Panic serves as a clear example of how moral panics can distort public perception and create lasting consequences for individuals and communities. Through the cases of D&D and MTG, it becomes evident that these games were not inherently harmful, but instead misunderstood due to their use of fantasy elements, symbolism, and the public's unfamiliarity of the games. By applying these theories of moral panic, it is clear that media influence, public fear, and morality all played significant roles in shaping harmless play into perceived societal threats. The labeling of players as satanic reflects a broader pattern of society reacting negatively towards what it does not understand. Rather than examining the actual content and communities of these games, the media relied on assumptions rooted in religious and cultural anxieties. This disconnect shows the importance of cultural relativism and a deeper understanding of human behavior rather than immediate judgment. Although the Satanic Panic has largely subsided, its legacy remains relevant today. Similar patterns of fear and misinformation continue to emerge around new forms of media, demonstrating that moral panics are not isolated events but recurring social patterns. Ultimately, the history of TTRPGs and TCGs during this time period reveals more about societal fears and cultural conflict than it does about the games themselves. Thank you for watching.
He's cute. But the one thing I've noticed about him right off, this is Pikachu, one thing I noticed about him right off was his tail. It's a lightning bolt, and it's a satanic Z.